What you're about to see is simply shameful. Within the walls of the Vatican, where oaths of allegiance should be sacred, a group of cardinals in cassocks dared to utter the words no one expected to hear. "You are no longer Pope." The sentence cut through the air like a cold, treacherous blade. The silence that followed was grave. No one breathed. Peter's successor, betrayed by the very people he called brothers, stood firm. He didn't cry, didn't plead. He simply looked at the crucifix and responded with something that chilled everyone's blood. "You can take away my title, but not my truth." That scene wasn't televised, but it echoes in the corridors of religious power. What happened there wasn't a resignation. It was something worse. It was a masked expulsion, an internal coup that reveals the darkest side of some corrupt cardinals. And what he did next left the world in shock. Dear faithful friend, join our community by clicking the red subscribe button below from your mobile phone or computer. Leave a comment about the city you're watching this video from and your name so we can pray for you together. May the Lord's grace and peace be with you, and may the faith that resides within you be a light in the darkness of the world. Night hung heavy over Rome, the sky torn by clouds that seemed to crush the entire city. Inside the apostolic palace, there was a silence more penetrating than any bell toll. The frescoed ceiling seemed to lean forward, as if listening to what was about to happen. No pilgrims, no guards, no officials interrupted those corridors. Only the most trusted cardinals had been summoned to this secret meeting, and the atmosphere was permeated with discomfort. Seated in a circle beneath an imposing dome, their red robes gathered like shadows spreading across the marble. In the center stood Pope Leo XIV. His white cassock glowed faintly in the candlelight, like a solitary flame against the crimson sea surrounding him. He did not sit, though a chair had been placed in front of him. He chose to remain standing, his hands clasped delicately in front of him, demonstrating a firm and unshakable serenity. Voices began to rise in whispers, so faint they were barely audible, but each word rang with the weight of a chisel striking stone. One of the cardinals leaned forward, his face half illuminated by the fire, and uttered what no one had dared to say in centuries. "Holy Father, you are no longer Pope." The phrase, though spoken softly, resounded like thunder. The other cardinals shifted uneasily. Some nodded, others gripped the arms of their chairs tightly, as if fearing the extent of their own audacity. The marble beneath his feet seemed to grow even colder. The echo of those words lingered in the air longer than it should have. At first, Leon didn't react. He lowered his head, his eyes hidden in shadow, and for a moment seemed to absorb the blow without responding. Then, slowly, he looked up. The candlelight illuminated his steady, burning eyes. "You dare," he said quietly, not in anger, but with a gravity that pressed down on everyone in the room. "You dare say what you can never command." A murmur ran through the circle. Some lowered their eyes, others kept their gaze steady. Tension rose like lightning shattering stained glass. Suddenly, a cardinal slammed his hand on the table. "The church is bigger than you, Holy Father. You must obey the college or the church will fall." Leon stepped forward. The echo of his footsteps resounded in the chamber with the force of a hammer striking iron. Instinctively, the circle of red robes closed in as if preparing for battle. "The church," he replied in a grave voice, "is not yours to manage. Nor is it mine to give away. It belongs to Christ alone, and if they tell me I'm no longer Pope, I will answer." He paused, raising his hand with impressive calm. Had they forgotten whose key it was? His eyes fell on the papal ring, which gleamed in the flickering light. The silence that followed was so thick that even the flames seemed to waver, unnaturally erect. Then, in a clear, powerful voice, Leo declared, "And you cannot undo what heaven has sealed." The words vibrated through the dome, striking stone and hearts. Some cardinals flinched, others froze as if struck. It didn't seem like a simple defense. It was a sentence carrying the weight of eternity. Before anyone could respond, the massive bronze doors at the back of the hall began to shake violently, though no hands touched them. They creaked again, as if something ancient had awakened from its slumber. The noise caused several cardinals to jump to their feet, their robes brushing against the marble. No guards appeared, no servants appeared. The doors, locked from the inside, vibrated as if under some invisible pressure. Those present looked at each other in fear. One of them quickly crossed himself, as if protecting himself from an evil he dared not name. Another murmured, "It's just the wind." But in that chamber there was no wind, no draught to stir the heavy curtains, no breath to fan the flames. Pope Leo XIV stood erect, his gaze fixed on the closed doors. For a moment, the cardinals saw him not just as a man dressed in white, but as someone who had borne the weight of the chair of Peter through the centuries. His mere presence filled the room with the same pressure as the clouds outside. One of the cardinals took a shaky step forward, pointing a hand at him. "Holy Father, you challenge us as if you had only your power. But see, even the sky answers. The gates groan against you." Leon's eyes narrowed. "No," he replied firmly, "not against me. They are moving because you spoke lies into the heart of the church." His words cut like razor blades. Several recoiled as if wounded, while others seethed with fury. The circle began to crack. Then the doors burst open with a deafening crash. Thunder shook the hall, the candlesticks trembled, and spilled wax stained the polished tables. Beyond, the corridor seemed empty, without a guard, without a servant, without a pilgrim. That emptiness was more imposing than any crowd. It was as if the palace itself were holding its breath. One cardinal placed his hand on his chest. Another whispered, "This does not come from men." Leon walked toward the opening. His cassock brushed softly against the marble, the only sound as he passed through the warm gloom into the darkness of the corridor. He stopped, turning just enough for his voice to echo back into the room. "You say I'm no longer the Pope," he said in a resonant voice, "and yet the stones move before my steps." The air grew heavy, pressing down on the room. Some cardinals remained motionless. Others followed cautiously, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity. Their footsteps trembled as they approached the entrance. The corridor stretched long and shadowy, lined with portraits of past pontiffs. Their painted gazes silently watching, but deep within, a faint glow began to pulse, like a heartbeat in the darkness. A murmur ran through those present. Some claimed it was a reflection, a candle reflected in the glass. Yet that light seemed alive, brighter than fire and colder than the moon. Leon didn't hesitate. He advanced, each step imposing silence. His silhouette stood out starkly against the intense glare. It was the lone figure walking toward the unknown. Suddenly, the light grew, casting long shadows behind him, and in that instant, the portraits hanging on the walls, centuries of popes immortalized on canvas, seemed to glow as if their eyes had moved, all fixed on the men gathered there. A shiver ran through the group. "The portraits judge us," one of them whispered. "A regia." "It can't be," said another. But no one denied that the air had grown denser, charged with something beyond flesh and stone. Leon stopped in the middle of the hallway, placing his hand on a cross carved into the wall. He didn't look back, but his voice rang out loudly, "These walls remind you of what you've forgotten. No council, no meeting, no ambition can overthrow what heaven has crowned." His words hung like incense, refusing to dissipate. The cardinals shifted uneasily, some burned with anger, others with fear, and yet no one could answer with certainty. What could they say? when even the stones seemed to echo their truth. The light at the end of the corridor grew brighter, staining the silver marble. The nearest portrait, of a stern pope from centuries past, shone in that glow, and for an instant his lips seemed to part. A murmur, faint as a sigh, broke the silence. "Custody! Guard!" Several cardinals recoiled, crashing into the wall. One gasped sharply, clutching his rosary until the beads dug into his palm. Another shook his head violently, repeating that it was all a figment of his imagination. Yet the whisper persisted, clear and penetrating, imbuing the room with an air of ancient dust and forgotten sanctity. Leon lifted his chin and resumed his pace, moving ever closer to the light. The cardinals, driven as much by fear as by the need to defy him, followed. Each step sounded like a judgment. Finally, they reached the end of the corridor. The glow emanated from a small niche carved into the wall, which they had passed countless times without paying attention. Inside was a stone box, locked with iron bolts, its surface worn by centuries. The light didn't reflect off it, but instead erupted from within, faint but steady, like the breath of something hidden. The cardinals stopped suddenly. No one dared approach, though they all leaned forward, eyes wide. "This shouldn't be here," one of them whispered. "There's no record of it." Leon stepped into the small alcove, and the glow bathed his face in a silvery glow. He placed his hand on the box. It was warm, too warm to be just stone. He turned his head slightly and spoke in a low but clear voice. "You say I am no longer Pope. However, this was waiting for me, not you." The cardinals found no answer. The air grew so thick their hearts pounded like drums. Without warning, the iron bolts flew open. The screech sounded like steel cutting. The heavy lid began to move without anyone pushing it. A wave of light flooded in, blinding, filling the corridor as if dawn had broken through stone. The cardinals raised their hands to cover themselves. Some screamed, stumbling into the shadows. Only Leon remained motionless, his hand resting on the lid, receiving what emerged. And then, from within the box, a sound began to emerge. It wasn't a human voice, nor singing, nor thunder. It was all at once, deeper than any words. The echo bounced off the stone walls and returned amplified, making the air tremble as if the Vatican itself were breathing. The cardinals were stunned. One of them fell to his knees, covering his ears with both hands. Another clung to a marble column, murmuring prayers under his breath. The sound contained no words, but revealed each man's deepest fears. Pope Leo XIV did not hesitate. He leaned a little closer, his hand steady on the box, his eyes fixed on the growing light. His white cassock gleamed like fire against the silver glow. He spoke calmly, though his voice had to rise to overpower the vibrant vibration. "They wanted to steal me. However, this box was sealed long before you, and only now is it being opened. Don't you see?" The glow grew, flooding the room with waves of light. The portraits of former popes flickered on the walls, as if their painted eyes had lit up. For a moment, the marble floor reflected not the men present, but a vast starry sky. Panic set in among some. "Seal it!" shouted one. "Seal it again before it consumes us. This is heresy, Holy Father." "Alayaye!" exclaimed another. Their voices clashed with the noise, but their protests dissolved like dust in the wind. The rumble transformed, congealing into a single word, low, resonant, impossible to deny. Petros, Peter's name. The cardinals remained motionless. Their robes, their breathing, their murmurs froze. The word filled the chamber, alive, as if the apostle himself was speaking from the stones of the basilica. Leon lifted his head, his eyes shining. "The first shepherd still calls me by name. Who among you would dare contradict him?" Silence fell over the room. No one dared answer, even those who moments before had demanded his resignation cowered, trembling under the weight of centuries. But the box did not come out. The light pulsed more intensely, until the camera seemed to burn with pure fire. The screws, already broken, melted in rivers that ran across the marble like veins of liquid metal. Something stirred within, undefined, with shapes that moved like flames without being fire, breathing without human breath. A cardinal, overcome with terror, staggered forward and pointed at Leo with a trembling hand. "You will bring us ruin. You are no longer Pope." At that moment, the roar erupted again, like bells ringing simultaneously. The cardinals recoiled, covering their faces, their robes flapping in the wind that came from nowhere. The candles suddenly went out, plunging half the hall into darkness. The only light remaining was from the box, a bright, pulsing fire. Leon stood erect in the center, his hand firmly on the lid, and as the roar reached its peak, something emerged from the flames. A fragment of burning parchment rose, floating like a cinder, until it slowly descended into Leon's open hand. The parchment, glowing like embers, rested in the palm of Pope Leo XIV's hand, glowing from within. Its edges curled as if on fire, though the surface was not consumed. It pulsed once, like a heart, before settling into a steady glow. The cardinals, pressed against the walls, watched in stunned silence. No one dared speak. The roar that had shaken the hall moments before faded, leaving a void as loud as thunder. The box was still open, dripping with silvery threads of light, but that fire had chosen him, and him alone. Leon held up the shards solemnly. The parchment slowly began to reveal itself, as if the letters were being rewritten before his eyes. Ancient symbols twined like luminous vines across the surface. Leon frowned, squinting to decipher the words. A cardinal broke the silence with a tense voice. "Don't read it, whatever it is. It doesn't come from God." Leon turned his head slightly, his gaze piercing the darkness. "You dare decide what comes from God when heaven itself opens before you." His tone held no anger, only conviction, which made him even more imposing. The cardinals looked at each other in despair. Some were pale with fear, others burning with indignation. One muttered under his breath, "This cannot be allowed, not now, not under his command." Leon unfolded the parchment. The surface touched the stone with a glow that illuminated his face, accentuating each line as if the glow were lifting him from this world. The first line appeared, and his lips moved in reverent silence. His breath caught. "What's he saying?" one of the cardinals asked with forced courage. Leon didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the text, as if each word weighed more than marble. Finally, he raised his head and, in a deep, measured voice, said, "You choose me." The statement swept through the room like an invisible wave. Several cardinals gaped, others shook their heads, muttering that it was impossible. No scroll speaks to the living. It's a forgery, a fake. But Leon held up the document, and the glow intensified, speaking for itself. The text became legible for all to see. Names filled the surface, line after line, stretching back centuries. A succession of pontiffs written in the same handwriting, and at the end, newly engraved, a name shone, Leo XIV. The cardinals backed away. Some stumbled against the portraits on the walls, their faces paler than the paintings themselves. One fell to his knees, whispering in a choked voice, "It's impossible, impossible." Leo's voice rose above the protests. "They say I'm no longer Pope, but the records of heaven say otherwise. Do you think you can remove my name from what God himself inscribed?" His words ripped through the silence like a whip. The parchment burned so brightly that its light filled every corner, illuminating red robes, painted eyes, and trembling hands. Suddenly, a burst of brightness filled the hall. The portraits of previous popes seemed to burn in their frames. And for a moment, each painted face opened its mouth, not to speak, but to release a single word, echoing off the walls. Costs, guardian. The cardinals were petrified. Some screamed, others threw themselves to the floor, pressing their faces against the cold marble as if to hide from the judgment. Leo remained standing, clutching the parchment, his voice rising above the echo. Guardian, shepherd, you cannot deprive me, because I was not crowned by you. I was chosen. The hall trembled. Dust fell from the vaulted ceiling. The box at the base of the niche groaned, as if something even deeper lay within. Then the parchment in Leon's hands burst into light and folded in on itself, sinking into his palm until it disappeared, as if it had fused with him. The silence that followed was total, but slowly the box began to shake again. The air became oppressive. The parchment had disappeared into the Pope's skin, leaving only a faint sheen clinging to his cassock. The cardinals leaned against the walls, breathing heavily, not daring to look at him. The box, however, was not finished. The stone blocks creaked, as if pushed from within. The dim light filling the corridor contracted, as if breathing silently, preparing to burst forth again. One of the cardinals, trembling, whispered desperately, "Close it. For God's sake, close it before it's too late." Her scream echoed loudly, unleashing the terror she couldn't hide. Leon didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the box, calm but watchful. His voice, measured but booming, filled the chamber. They fear what they do not understand. But what awaits you here is not for you. It belongs only to Pedro's lineage. The marble beneath his feet vibrated. A low murmur emerged from the stone, soft at first, growing until it echoed off the walls. The portraits seemed to tremble, as if the painted figures were leaning forward to witness the moment. Then it happened. The box split open, a luminous crack crossing the stone. A white glow spread, so pure it was blinding. The cardinals screamed, covering their faces. Some tried to flee, but the bronze doors slammed shut with a crash that shook the corridor. They were trapped. The crack widened, and from it emerged not a scroll or a flame, but an object wreathed in threads of light. It floated above the broken stone, slowly rising until it landed in front of Leon's chest. As the glow faded, its shape became clear, a key forged from a metal older than iron. Its surface was engraved with symbols impossible to read. The cardinals stood motionless, stunned. One of them barely managed to whisper the key of Peter. Another shook his head vehemently. "It can't be. It's just a legend." Leon calmly extended his hand. The key trembled as if resisting, and then floated into his hands, drawn by an invisible force. As soon as his fingers wrapped around it, the crack closed, the light faded, and the corridor plunged back into shadow. The key glowed faintly in his hand. It was heavy, much heavier than its size warranted, and as he lifted it, the very air seemed to bend around him. Leon turned slowly toward the circle of cardinals. His expression remained serene, but his voice was heavy in every chest. "They want to take my position away from me. However, heaven has placed the key in my hands. Tell me then, who speaks with greater authority, you or God?" No one dared answer. The scarlet robes seemed to shrink in the gloom. Some looked down in shame, others clenched their fists in suppressed fury. But no one could find words. The silence grew even denser. Only a metallic hum emanated from the key, as if it were alive. Suddenly, the sound grew higher. The key pulsed with light once, twice, and each pulse caused the marble beneath his feet to crack in jagged lines that extended from where Leon stood. The cracks glowed faintly, like fire running through veins of stone. Dust fell from the ceiling. Portraits rattled in their frames. The entire corridor seemed about to split in two. Panic gripped the cardinals. Some screamed, some slammed themselves against the walls, and several knelt, begging for mercy. Leon held the key high. His silhouette stood out against the flickering light. His voice dominated the noise. "You proclaim that I am no longer Pope, but the earth itself denies it." Cracks suddenly opened. Shards of marble flew, and the floor began to sink beneath their feet. The roar of breaking stone filled the room, deafening, and then, from deep within the palace, a voice rose, piercing through the trembling stone. The sound boomed beneath the marble, shaking the hall so violently that dust fell from the ceiling like ash. The cardinals clung to the walls, their red robes tangled in panic. Some prostrated themselves on the ground, murmuring prayers interrupted by fear. The cracks in the marble glowed brighter, tracing their path like motionless lightning across the floor. From those depths, the voice rose again, low, immense, impossible to ignore. It wasn't a human voice, nor did it belong to thunder. It was layered, multiple tones fused together, as if the ages were speaking at once. At first, the words were confused, until suddenly they became clear, cutting through the air with a precision impossible to misinterpret. "You are Peter." The statement echoed through the stone, resonating in bones and breath. "You are Peter." The cardinals remained motionless, transformed into marble statues. For centuries, those words had been read in scripture, sung in the liturgy, inscribed in the foundations of the church. But never, ever had they resounded, alive, emerging from the earth itself. Pope Leo XIV stood firm in the center of the trembling corridor, the ancient key raised in his hand. His face was serene, his silhouette framed by the fiery fissures that surrounded him. The voice that shook the world responded to his presence like thunder. A cardinal cried out in panic, "It's a lie! It's the enemy!" But another fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "No, it's the rock." The rock speaking again. The divide opened like a blade between them. Half of them screamed blasphemies, accusing him of fraud to maintain power. The other half trembled in astonishment, unable to deny what they had just heard. The College of Cardinals, once united, was crumbling before the Pope's eyes. Leon slowly lowered the key, bathing the cracks in a glow that seemed to calm the marble. His voice rose steadily, reaching every shadow. "Do you see now? You say I'm no longer the Pope." But the voice from Peter's bones proclaimed otherwise. "Whom should you believe?" No one could answer, and the voice from beneath the earth rose again. This time, it uttered no words, but a single tone, heavy, dense, that seemed to bend the air. The cracks grew brighter, the ground shook as if the basilica's foundations were shifting, and suddenly, silence. The tremors ceased. The light faded, leaving only glowing scars on the marble. Dust drifted slowly down the candlelit corridor, settling on the scarlet robes and white cassocks. The cardinals gasped, their eyes still wide with horror. The division between them was already evident. Some regarded him with burning suspicion, others with reverence. But all remained silent. Leon lowered the key to the side. His gaze scrutinized them, steady, penetrating. "They tried to end my reign with whispers," he said, "but the sky thundered my name." No one interrupted. Then, very faintly at first, a new sound arose, a slow creak, like wood giving way under weight. All eyes turned to the end of the corridor, where the bronze doors began to move. They weren't pushed from outside or pulled from within. They moved forward with deliberate force until the room was sealed again. The echo swelled like a sentence. And soon after, on the other side of the closed doors, the rumble of footsteps could be heard. The footsteps echoed constantly, each step reverberating through the bronze as if the hallway itself had acquired a heart. The cardinals paled, some clutched their rosaries until the beads creaked under the pressure. The sound approached, heel to heel, unhurried, inevitable. No guard walked like that. No servant dared tread so firmly in the apostolic palace. It was something different, something without haste or doubt, only certainty. The doors vibrated with force, their hinges creaking as if barely able to contain what was approaching. The candles in the hallway burned uncontrollably, their flames pulling away from the doors as if repelling them. A desperate voice broke the silence. "Holy Father, give the order! Give the order now!" A trembling cardinal fell to his knees before Leo, his eyes wide. "If you are truly the Pope, stop what is coming." Leo didn't answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the doors, his hand steady on the key that still pulsed with the dim light. His silence spoke louder than any order, and this terrified the cardinals even more. The footsteps ceased. A silence so absolute fell over the chamber that even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Only the beating hearts of the men filled the void. Then 3 slow, heavy blows sounded, each reverberating against the bronze like a great bell. The cardinals backed away until they were pressed against the walls. One of them muttered under his breath, "He can't get in. You must not enter." Leon stepped forward. His cassock brushed against the shiny cracks in the floor. His silhouette rose, illuminated from below by the still glowing embers on the marble. He raised the key, holding it high so that its light bathed the trembling faces around him. "If heaven wishes to open," he proclaimed firmly, "no man, no council, no legion can close it." The room erupted in arguments. Some shouted that he had lost his mind. Others demanded that he be obeyed. The room roared in division, red sleeves fluttering as former brothers now accused each other. The pounding on the door returned, louder, shaking the ceiling until it flung dust like ash. Portraits rattled in their frames. Leon walked toward the doors. Each step he took muffled some of the chaos, as if his mere presence absorbed the noise. The cardinals reluctantly parted, making way for him. His figure loomed large in the flickering light, the key shining in his hand like lightning. When he reached the doors, he stopped. The bronze pulsed gently beneath his hand, warm, almost as if it were breathing. He placed the ancient key at the junction of the gates. The murmur in the chamber suddenly ceased. Not a sigh, not a breath, not a movement. Even the knocking stopped. For a moment, everything was silent, and then, beyond the doors, a deep, resonant voice spoke. He wasn't strong, nor did he need to be. His weight filled the air with such authority that it overrode any words. "Open up!" The cardinals burst into panic, clamoring, clawing at the walls as if seeking escape. Some fell to the marble, their faces pressed against it. Pope Leo XIV did not move. He remained erect before the doors, the key burning in his hand. His voice rose above the terror, calm, firm, steady, and cunning, so that every man present was willing to testify. He held up the key. The bronze gleamed as if recognizing its owner. With a crack like lightning splitting the sky, the locks began to turn. The bronze gates shook as each lock was opened, one after the other, each click echoing like a hammer striking stone. The key in the Pope's hand glowed brighter and brighter, threads of light running down his arm, spilling into the carved groove. The entire corridor vibrated as if the palace itself were breathing. The cardinals shouted for him to stop. Some clung to each other, others to the columns. Several collapsed completely, their lips pressed against the cold marble, murmuring frantic prayers. The once united scarlet tide broke into a sea of fear. The last lock clicked with a deep click. The bronze pulsed once like a heart, and the doors roared open. Light flooded the widening crack, not the warm flame of candles, nor the pale glow of the moon, but a brightness so pure it was blinding. The entire corridor was whitewashed, the portraits bathed in gold until their painted mouths seemed to move. The cardinals covered their faces. Some paled, Others gasped. Their voices joined in a desperate cry. "Close them! Close them!" But Leon didn't close them. He stepped forward, silhouetted against the light, key raised. His voice rose firmly, drowning out the panic. "You said I'm no longer Pope, and yet heaven answers with its own door. Tell me now, who is speaking?" The glow expanded, devouring the room until no shadows remained, and through this brightness, a silhouette began to take shape. At first, a human shadow was barely visible, shrouded in light, but with each heartbeat it became clearer. "An angel," whispered a cardinal. "No, it's a trial," said another, his voice breaking. The figure advanced. The echo of its footsteps sounded like bells, slow, imposing. With each step, the cracks in the floor flared anew, burning beneath the marble. The portraits trembled, and a murmur emerged from their painted lips. Dozens of voices united in a song too ancient to understand. Chaos gripped the cardinals. Some ran toward the closed ends, pounding the stone with their fists. Others fell face down, their foreheads pressed against the glowing cracks. Only Leon remained standing. She didn't cover her face, didn't tremble. Her figure stood taller than ever, framed by the torrent of light. The key in her hand pulsed in time with the approaching footsteps, as if connected to what was to come. The silhouette filled the threshold. Still blurred by the glow, it raised its hand, enormous, veiled, indistinct in the fire. This gesture was enough to silence even the screams of the terrified. The entire air was in suspense, waiting for the command. The voice spoke again. It was not thunder, not echo, not human. It rolled like an eternity compressed into a breath. "Guardian." The word fell like a hammer, crushing any argument. The scarlet tide froze in shock and terror. Some wept, others stared in silence. No one moved. Leon bowed his head for the first time. The light enveloped him, casting his silhouette in a white flame. He held up the key as if acknowledging the title bestowed upon him. The figure entered the hall. The light grew until it became unbearable, swallowing walls, portraits, and marble until everything was suspended in brightness. And then, as if the fire had receded into a whisper, the voice spoke again, softer, but even more penetrating. "One test remains. Would you hand over the key if the hand that handed it demanded it?" The question sounded like a judgment. The cardinal shivered, glued to the floor, some shouting that no one could answer that. But Leon didn't back down. He held up the key, the light falling like a waterfall of fire. His eyes burned uncontrollably. "The key isn't mine. It was given to someone. And if the giver claims it, I'll return it. Not to men, not to council, not out of fear, but only to heaven." The glow intensified, erasing every shadow. The figure's hand reached out, enormous, blazing, palm open in anticipation. The cardinals couldn't bear to look. Their faces tightened, trembling as if the world itself were about to shatter. Leon lowered his head. He clutched the key to his chest. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The cracks in the marble froze. The air grew thick, impossible to breathe. Then he opened his hand. The key leaped from his palm, floating toward the fire. She hovered between him and the light. For a second, no one knew if she would be taken or brought back. The figure's hand closed over her. The flash of light erupted like a storm, shaking the walls and foundations of the palace. The cardinals screamed in terror, and then silence. When the light went out, the figure was gone, and so was the key. Only Pope Leo XV remained standing in the hallway. His hands were empty. The hems of his cassock were scarred as if they had been touched by fire, but his face was serene. The cardinals rose slowly, their knees trembling and their eyes wide. No one dared speak. They looked at him as if he had been stripped naked and crowned in the same instant. Finally, Leo's voice broke the silence. Gravely, firmly, unequivocally, "You said he was no longer Pope. Heaven heard your words." And he answered. He turned, walking down the corridor, as the bronze doors closed behind him. His footsteps echoed alone, steady, unwavering. The cardinals remained where they were, unable to rise, their scarlet robes draped on the ground like fallen banners. They had no answer, only the memory of the light and truth that had shaken them to their core, because they had tried to tear it away from you. And yet, when the voice from heaven thundered and judgment arose before him, Pope Leo XIV stood higher than a flooded river. And now, I want to invite you to join this community. Leave your opinion in the comments. And if you're a true Christian, share this video with 5 people you love and take the opportunity to click on the video that appears on the screen.